Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. It's Terry, your host, coming to you today from the Old Dominion and specifically from the Shenandoah Valley. One place I passed by today is the little town of New Market. And New Market is noteworthy probably for a few reasons, but one of the main reasons is the May 15th, 1864 Battle of New Market. And that battle was not terribly important. I mean, it did stave off the Union capture of Stanton, Virginia. And by the way, the U is silent in Stanton. It's not Staunton, it's Stanton. It staved off that capture, but what was most noteworthy about the battle is it's the first time, probably the only time in U.S. history, where a student body of an institution was militarized, for lack of a better term. And became part of an army. There have certainly been instances where, like midshipmen from the Naval Academy that were in the class of, say, 1942. Graduated in December of 1941 after the attack on Pearl Harbor. They just basically said, okay, congratulations, you're all, commissioned officers. And I'm sure that the Army did something not dissimilar back then. But that wasn't putting midshipmen or cadets in the military. That was graduating them and commissioning them, which is a different thing. But as a unit, the only school that has ever done that is the Virginia Military Institute, which is, of course, down in Lexington. And in 1864, their Corps of Cadets, had 347 members. And so Confederate General John Breckinridge basically militarized them and said, hey, we need every available body. And when I say every available body, that's really what it was, because there were kids out there that were like 15 years old, that were cadets there. And I guess that's what happens when a populace, or a government gets desperate for troops. They have kids in military academies very young, and then, they'll put them on a battlefield. So anyway, the general on the other side was the Union general was a guy named Franz Sigel, and his task was to march south down the Shenandoah Valley and capture Stanton and link up with another Union force coming over from West Virginia that was destroying the railroad and other lines of communication. And this was all to put pressure on the Army of Northern Virginia, which was operating to the east, and this was part of Grant's plan. And here's a picture of Grant. I just throw that up there because I think Grant was arguably the best general the United States has ever had. But anyway, so Sigel marches south, but Breckinridge responds and without going into all the gory details, there's some cavalry involved, but basically Breckinridge and Sigel's forces meet at New Market. Now the cadets from VMI, the 247 cadets, they were made up a battalion, and they were held in reserve. But what happened is the Union forces started to gain ground and push the Confederates back, and in fact probably would have won the day, but for the fact that the cadets were put into the fray. The cadets help, stabilize the line, and then two Union counterattacks, one on the right by a couple of infantry battalions, and then one on the left by Union cavalry, both were repulsed. The Union cavalry just ran into artillery, and that's really not a fair fight. Confederate artillery. And the Union infantry battalions were kind of in disarray, and reportedly Siegel, whose I think first language was German, like reverted to his first language under the pressure of the battle and started, yelling out commands in German, which is cool if you're commanding like a Prussian army, but it's not so cool if not everybody in your force speaks German. And so anyway, the Union attack faltered. The cadets helped basically win the day, and there's a famous area called the Field of Shoes, and here's a picture of that. And that kind of occurred because the cadets' shoes were like, it was really muddy, and it was raining, and as they start running across the field, I guess they didn't tie their shoes tight enough, and some of them lost their shoes in the mud, and they just kept running in bare feet and stuff. And they were able to capture a couple of cannon, and it was a big deal. It was unique, and it was a big deal. But the interesting thing about this is that 10 cadets were killed in action or died shortly thereafter of their wounds, I think. And I think 6 of them are buried at VMI. 1 of them is buried at the battlefield, and then 3 others were buried elsewhere. 2 of those 10 cadets, though, were not Virginians. They were actually kids from North Carolina. But anyway, this is a big part of the lore of VMI. And, as you may know, Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson was a professor of artillery at VMI when the war started. And I've had a little exposure to it simply because my son was considering VMI for his education. So there's still a lot of that. They still talk a lot about the Battle of Newmarket. Essentially, the battle ended up being like a Pyrrhic victory for the Confederates. Siegel was replaced by Grant, who was pretty furious about the whole affair. And shortly thereafter, the new Union general just goes down and captures Stanton like Siegel was supposed to. So anyway, that's a brief synopsis of the Battle of Newmarket. It's not a huge battlefield, and it's right next to I-81. I mean, like, if you've driven 81, you've seen the battlefield, unless you're really got tunnel vision or you only do it at night. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of things. There's some new FMCSA rulemaking that's going on, and there's one to kind of improve ELD, and man, I would love to see, what is this thingamajig here in my truck? Whoever makes this, they need to get kicked in the crotch. This is like 20-year-old technology. It's, and that's one of the complaints, by the way, that the FMCSA has gotten from drivers, is they feel like they get victimized by this thing sometimes, and I've felt that way. The other thing that another rule that they're looking at is a rule that would basically create a situation where every single truck has some kind of electronic signature that can be monitored from the highway. So either a stationary apparatus, or I guess they would have an apparatus in DOT/police vehicles. And the reason for that is that they continue to identify a number of companies that are really just unsafe operators. Now, if you go on the web, you can find out about a lot of the big truckload carriers, and I will tell you that the usual suspects in the truckload industry seem to be Werner, Swift, and U.S. Express. Also, FedEx and UPS get bad marks. I know, not last year, but I think the year, maybe it was, It was in early January of 2020. There was a 5-person fatal crash I remember having to go around on the PA Turnpike that involved a UPS truck and a and a FedEx trucks. 2 UPS drivers were killed, and some other people in a bus and a car, and although it was the bus's fault, but anyway, when you work for a company that has a bad safety record, I'm gonna turn some lights on here. I don't know if that helps. When you work for a company that has a bad safety record, it impacts you. You spend a lot of time in way stations and stuff. So anyway, so that's just interesting that if you work for a company that has a bad safety record, you will be, if this rule goes through, and it's just in the pre-rule stage, they will roll out the official proposal here sometime later in 2022. But if you work for a company that has a bad safety record, you can probably expect to get pulled over a lot more. Now I've been pulled over twice for level 3s. I've never had any problems, and then I've had a level 1. Interestingly, when I was bobtailed, I had a level 1 at a way station in Maryland. But I think it's important to understand how good or not good your company is and what their safety record is. And if there's a culture that seems like it, I've talked about this, where the safety department is really just the accident department, you might want to consider that in keeping a job or in a company that you're going to. Because here's what I would say: if you're going to go to a company to make 4 cents a mile more, if I told you were going to get stopped 3 more times this year than you otherwise would have for roadside inspections, how would you feel about that 4 cents a mile? I mean, if you're clean, you're clean. But it's just one of those things that I don't think anybody really wants to go through, even if your company pays a bonus for getting a clean inspection. And I got to say this: not that I'm opposed to getting money, but you got to ask yourself, why is it that companies have to motivate their drivers just to do what the drivers are supposed to be doing anyway? And maybe that's the problem with the safety culture, is we reward normal behavior. It's like paying people not to get arrested for murder. I mean, it's like, you walk out of Walmart and they give you a $5 gift card because you didn't shoplift anything. I mean, the standard is to pass the inspection. That's the bare minimum, right? Like, that's what we teach. That's what we go through in school. Your tires, if they're below 90 psi, you're getting a flat tire ticket. I mean, this is all basics. So I'm not sure we still don't have kind of a tweaked safety culture, but I would say that working for a company, and already if you work for a company that has bad CSA score, you're going to be in more way stations than you otherwise would. But what if every cop in America, or every state trooper in America, or every DOT officer, like, without even checking, can just look at a device that's on your truck and you just went by and they're like, oh, that company sucks, let's pull this guy over. I mean, it's not fair to you if you're a good driver, but you're, like my mom used to say, you're judged by the company you keep. So if you drive for a company that has a bad safety record, it's gonna cost you money, because there may be times where you do have an issue and you just kind of skate by, you get it fixed later, whatever it is, or maybe you just missed it. But anyway, that's a rule that's going to be interesting to kind of see. And by the way, there may still be some hours of service changes coming down the pike from the feds also, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. But anyway, be safe, do a good pre-trip, and hopefully you'll not have any issues out on the roads. be safe. So thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time on Tim Travels.